Well, let's speak now to Dr. Hamid Khan of the BMA. He's here in the studio, and Rachel Clarke, a junior doctor who joins us live from Oxford. Good evening to you both. Dr. Clarke, to start with you, the BMA had recommended this as the best deal junior doctors were going to get. So why vote against it?
It's very simple, and Jeremy Hunt, in a way, put it very eloquently in his own words. He's still talking about his government's so-called manifesto pledge for a 7-day NHS. What he has failed to hear for an entire year is our objection to the notion that a 7-day NHS can be delivered with no funding and no extra staffing. The NHS is already desperately underfunded, and frontline junior doctors like me are on our knees pretty much every day that we go into work. That's even before he attempts to stretch services even more thinly over 7 days. There are no more doctors. He's not delivering any more doctors. He's not delivering any resources. This 7-day NHS was always a fiction that he has used as a stick to beat junior doctors like me, and we have said no over and over again. The thing none of us can understand now is why he still refuses to listen.
Jeremy Hunt has pointed out, though, Dr. Rachel Clarke, that only 40% of those eligible to vote rejected the contract. A third didn't vote at all. What happens now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it would be a grave error to assume that the doctors who did vote for the contract did so as an endorsement of the contract. I am one of that group. I voted for the contract with a very heavy heart, very reluctantly, because I saw it as a bad option, but the least worst option in the new Brexit climate that we face. I think what has to happen now, and if Jeremy Hunt has any concerns about patient safety, he would strive to do this. He needs to recognise and hear our concerns, and he needs to address them. He needs to stop hiding behind rhetoric. At the moment, there are gaps in all our rotas. He needs to address those. He needs to find ways of filling the gaps with new doctors. He needs to recognise that currently doctors do not receive adequate training. They have no whistleblowing protection whatsoever in the NHS. They're the only group of employees in the NHS that lack that protection, and he needs to address that. What he has to stop doing is spinning. Actions speak louder than words, and he needs to start acting in a way that can rebuild the corrosive and devastating effect he has had on the trust morale of doctors.
And if he doesn't, Dr. Clarke, are we going to see further strike action?
I think that's a very real possibility. I think right now the stakes are high, and there is a window in which the Department of Health and Jeremy Hunt, by their actions, could do something to address this situation. He used to pretend this entire dispute was the making of the BMA, that somehow we had been whipped up into a frenzy by our militant union. Well, the vote today proves that that is not accurate. This is an opposition.
Let me just bring in Dr. Hamid Khan on that point about the BMA. I mean, there are those who say that the poisonous atmosphere, this is all down to the poisonous atmosphere that has emerged in this very bitter dispute, that whatever Jeremy Hunt was going to say wasn't going to be accepted. Does the BMA bear some responsibility for that?
No, I don't think it does. To the contrary, the BMA has tried its best to come up with a solution in a very difficult situation. The Health Secretary has deliberately toxified the atmosphere around these talks. He has turned this into a bitter confrontational dispute, and it never had to be. He did so by calling the BMA radicalised, by using the term militant for doctors. He even spoke about nuclear options, and at worst, he even associated the Paris attacks and tried to scare the public by suggesting that we wouldn't work if there was a terrorist attack here, if we were on strike. And the
BMA didn't do any stirring up at this debate, you're saying?
Not at all. Not at all. We have simply tried to present the facts as best as we could. And if anything, Johan Malawana has tried his best to make things easier for the government by giving them this opportunity.
But he's now gone. So what happens now? What does this do for the credibility of the BMA? Who's going to be there to negotiate this contract again?
Well, that's very simple. The BMA has procedures. There will be a new head of the Junior Doctors Committee, and then they will take negotiations forward. But that is the wrong premise. The question that we should be asking is how the Health Secretary will change his approach, or whether the government will have a new Health Secretary in place. We have a situation where...
Is that what this is about, do you think? Do you think this is about the political uncertainty that we're currently undergoing, and that people think, junior doctors may think, that there may be a new health secretary, there may be an opportunity to get more?
No, I don't think this has been opportunism at all. The state of affairs is such that we have one of the lowest levels of funding in the NHS out of all developed countries, the lowest in the G7 group of countries. We have a health secretary who has deliberately stoked up confrontation with the terms that I just said. And the fundamental premise of this contract, the 7-day NHS, is based on completely manipulated, flawed evidence, to the extent that even the authors of the report, of the paper rather, which Jeremy Hunt keeps citing, have rubbished it. They've said that it's completely untrue. So we need to get rid of that premise. We need to get rid of this obsession with the so-called 7-day NHS, which is completely undefined, which is completely uncosted, and we need policies which are based on outcomes and not catchy sound bites.
Dr. Rachel Clarke, I mean, Jeremy Hunt gave quite a lot of ground in this dispute, didn't he? I mean, there were major concessions made on pay and on working conditions and on protections for people having to take time out, for example. Are you concerned that you could end up with a worse deal?
I really don't see it in those terms, I'm afraid. I don't think he did concede very much at all. And I think that this vote demonstrates that. The contract we have on the table currently is sexist. It discriminates against women. It offers no whistleblowing protection to junior doctors. It does very little to address the rota gaps that are plaguing every hospital in the country at the moment. And crucially, at no stage has he ever acknowledged the fact that if he really wants to deliver safer weekends for patients, something that he and his Prime Minister have claimed over and over again, the barrier to doing that is not us, junior doctors. It is the lack of funds from central government. And until he addresses those fundamental points, he leaves junior doctors like me feeling demoralised, undermined, cheapened and humiliated by this dispute. And I'm afraid the first and most important act he could do to rebuild this situation would be to do the honourable thing and resign.
OK, Dr. Rachel Clarke and Dr. Hamid Khan, thank you both very much indeed.